And we'll do it live. We'll do it live. So a lot of the information I'm going to go over today is strewn across many of my other videos, and the subject is the Republican Party and communism. Karl Marx and the Republican Party. International bankers, Karl Marx, the Republican Party, and communism. And this is really a video about the origins of communism and the Republican Party and how the Republican Party has covered up their actual history. And it's strange that they even did this, but if you notice, it's the Republican Party that spends the most time talking about communism and how they're fighting communism. And you've got Mark Levin, and he wrote a book about defeating the communists. And Jack Posobiec wrote a book about defeating communism. And other people in the Republican media, like Jesse Kelly, who I hear routinely on the radio, talks about how the real enemy of the Republicans is communism. And the strange part about all of this is that the Republican Party is the party that backed the communists to overthrow the czar and bring in communism. And they've always been doing this, and they've been doing this since inception. And I've told you this before in a lot of other videos, but I'm going to make this video that has the information in one place under this title, because a lot of my information about this subject is strewn through a lot of different videos under different titles, and it might be difficult to find. So the first thing I want to do is read to you this article from the New York Times, published May 11th, 1917. It says, "A warning to New Russia." Warning to New Russia is the title of this article from the New York Times, published May 11th, 1917. Warning to New Russia. Taft commends Jewish efforts for liberated people. Ex-President Taft applauded vigorously last night when Jacob H. Schiff, at a dinner of the American Jewish Friends of Free Russia, praised Theodore Roosevelt for his efforts while president to bring the Russian autocracy to a realization of the wrongs committed against Jewish subjects. There was another outburst of applause when Mr. Schiff, introduced by the Toastmaster as a Russian revolutionist, asserted that, in his opinion, the abrogation of the treaty between the United States and Russia, because of discrimination against American citizens of Jewish birth, was the inspiration which, to a great extent, ultimately brought about the overthrow of the Romanovs. Abrogation means to break the treaty. They broke a treaty between U.S. and Russia over treatment of Jews, according to this article. And then that was the inspiration that was used, they're saying in this article, to overthrow the Tsar. And the name of this group, this is obviously President Taft, ex-President Taft, Republican, Theodore Roosevelt, Republican, Jacob Schiff, Republican banker. And the group that they're participating in is called the American Jewish Friends of Free Russia. So it's this group called the American Jewish Friends of Free Russia that sponsored the revolt to overthrow the Tsar and bring in communism in Russia. This is the Republican Party. The Republicans on the radio didn't tell you, Rush Limbaugh didn't tell you this, and Mark Levin didn't tell you this, and Ben Shapiro didn't tell you this, and all these other Republicans, Jack Posobiec, I'm sure he doesn't mention this in his book. I haven't read it, but I'm sure he doesn't mention it. I've never heard him say anything remotely like this. So anyway, let's continue. Following the speeches, a resolution was adopted expressing confidence that Russia would not make a separate peace with Germany. So along with this overthrow of the Tsar, so I believe this is part of the equation, is that at the time, this is 1917, at the time, the Germans were seeking to make a pact with Russia. And this is part of why this occurred. They didn't want the Germans and the Russians making a pact. They wanted to keep them separated. They wanted to keep them at war. So it says here, the resolution adopted expressing confidence that Russia would not make a separate peace with Germany. Of course it wouldn't, because the new government in Russia is the new communist government in Russia is backed by the Republican Party in New York and the American Jewish Friends of Free Russia. It says here, it says here in quotes, I remember the efforts of Theodore Roosevelt, and be it ever to his credit, to bring the Russian autocracy to a realization of its wrongs, said Mr. Schiff. Mr. Schiff is a German Jewish banker, major banker figure in the Republican Party. He says, but he says here, but I remember also that it was under the administration of our honored guest of the evening, ex-President Taft, that the treaty was abrogated. Some of us have had some uneasy moments since the beginning of the present war, feeling that the intrigues which had been organized for a restoration of that treaty might be successful. So I guess some people were trying to restore that treaty between the U.S. and Russia, and that. So it says here, some of us had some uneasy moments since the beginning of the present war. This is 1917, so I believe we're talking about World War I, and the president at this time would have been a Democrat president, Wilson. World War I ended what year? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so World War I ended in November 1919. The Germans were seeking a pact with Russia because the Germans were in a battle. They had a Western front with France and they had an Eastern front with the Russians. So they were going to seek a pact with Russia. No, they weren't going to have any more trouble with Russia. And then they were going to go ahead and the Germans were going to shift their attention onto the Western front. The Eastern front would be freed up. So they overthrew the Tsar, brought in a new government in Russia, the new communist government, which was almost entirely Jewish, and then didn't have a pact with the Germans, and so forth. Some of us had some uneasy moments since the beginning of the present war, feeling that the intrigues which had been organized for a restoration of that treaty might be successful. But I am thankful to say that when the subject was brought to the attention of President Wilson, he said, do not be afraid. The United States never will make another treaty with Russia so long as the present conditions last. The present conditions being, at least in part, says here, the Tsar's treatment of Jewish subjects. And Taft was speaking directly to Wilson. And if you recall, it was Wilson who established the Federal Reserve Bank. And yeah, so it was Wilson who established the Federal Reserve Bank just before the onset of World War I, which then bankrupted all these governments in Europe, so that then they were now tied to the dollar. And of course, we have Jacob Schiff in Wilson's ear right here, ensuring that the Germans don't make a pact with Russia, and that the U.S. doesn't make a pact with Russia. So it says here, fortunately, those conditions do not now exist. The revolution has come. The Tsar's government has been swept away overnight. And the first act of the new government, God bless it, was to call home Russian exiles and to emancipate the Russian Jews. Of course, they're calling home the Russian exiles. Why? Because they're going to run the new government. They've emancipated the Jews. They're bringing the Russian Jews back into Russia to run this new government that's being set up by these Republican Party members and bankers. It says here, we do not know what may come hereafter, but this we do know, that never again will these rights be taken away. The Russian Jew has been liberated, and will remain so forever. The dinner, which was held at the Hotel Astor, gorgeous hotel in Manhattan that was demolished. Astor, the Astor family are also Jewish, billionaires. It says here, the dinner, which was held at the Hotel Astor, was attended by 800 guests, among them Henry Morgenthau, ex-ambassador to Turkey, Dr. S. Meltzer of the Rockefeller Institute, Congressman Meyer London, Dr. Samuel Schulman, Boris Shatsky, unofficial representative to the United States of the new Russian government, Herman Bernstein, and Dr. Julius Halpern, who made speeches. Edward Markham and Robert Underwood Johnson read poems written by them on the Russian Revolution. Mr. Taft praised the Jews for having retained their racial identity in the face of centuries of persecution and congratulated them on the Russian Revolution. The resolution opposing a separate peace with Germany will be cabled to M. Milikov, foreign minister in the Provisional Cabinet of Russia. So there you go. So who's this guy, M. Milikov? Foreign minister in the Provisional Cabinet of Russia. Okay, so that's how this starts. Now, what does this have to do with the Republican Party? Everything. I just read it to you. The Republican Party, which is a party of bankers like Jacob Schiff and the Rockefeller Institute, overthrew the Tsar and brought in a new government in Russia. And this new government that they brought in was Jewish. It was a Jewish government. And so I don't know why, but the Republican Party, as long as I can remember, has never mentioned any of this. They never mentioned. They go on and on and on and on and on endlessly about communism and the left and Antifa. Well, this is who they are. That's the strange part about it. One of the reasons I make these videos is so that you know where the shots are being fired from, because you're being lied to by the Republican media. Now, I am a registered Republican, and I voted for George Bush. I voted for John McCain, believe it or not. I voted for, and that was the last time I voted for those idiots. And whatever, I held my nose and voted for John McCain. I voted for George Bush twice. I voted for John McCain like an idiot. I voted for, after that, I was done. When Mitt Romney ran, I said no more of this. And I voted for Ron Paul. I think I may have written his name in or whatever. And then after that, I voted for Donald Trump. And then I voted for Donald Trump. And then I voted for Donald Trump again. And we finally got Donald Trump. And I'm very happy with Donald Trump. And I don't really consider Donald Trump to be a Republican, which is why I like him more. And if you notice, it was the Republican Party the first time around that was the biggest opposition to Donald Trump. Because when Donald Trump got elected in 2015, 2016, the Republican Party controlled the White House with Donald Trump and the Senate and the Congress. And what did they do? They got the FBI to investigate Donald Trump. They got the FBI, the Republican Party, who controlled every branch of government when Donald Trump got elected as president, right? He's the president and he's the Republican president, and he's got a Republican Congress and a Republican Senate. They literally controlled every branch of government. And it was the Republican Party that got the FBI and the DOJ to investigate the president of the United States, Donald Trump. Why? This is why. This is why it's so bizarre. But understand that this is the group behind communism around the world and terrorism around the world. And this is the group that took over the Democrat Party. There is no Democrat Party. There is no Democrat Party. The Democrat Party lost the Civil War and was dissolved. And when Woodrow Wilson, you just heard this quote that Woodrow said in this quote when he's talking to Jacob Schiff. He says to Jacob Schiff, who's a Republican banker, he says, "Do not be afraid. The United States will never make another treaty with Russia so long as the present conditions last." So here he is he's got a Republican banker in his ear telling him what they want. So you could say, oh, he was a Democrat. He's a Democrat. He started the Federal Reserve. No, you got to go back to the before the Civil War. Understand that it was Andrew Jackson, who was a Democrat and the leader of the Democrat Party, of Thomas Jefferson, who blocked the entire banking scheme to establish a central bank, and he fought them tooth and claw. He fought the bankers tooth and claw, and then after he passed away, they brought in this whole new system they formed a new coalition government, the Republicans did, with Abraham Lincoln, and then they started a war with the South, and they brought in communist revolutionaries from Germany to fight the Americans in the South. And one of those communist revolutionaries' name was August Willich. Just as an example, August Willich. Who is he? In London, Willich became an associate of the French revolutionary and political exile Emmanuel Barthélemy, according to William Liebknecht. You don't need to know that. August Willich, born Johann August Ernst von Willich, was a military officer in the Prussian army, later enlisting and receiving a commission in the United States Army. Born into Prussian nobility, he formally discarded his title in 1847 and actively participated in the revolutions of 1848. So understand that he was former Prussian nobility that then abandoned, he discarded his title in the aristocracy, joined the communist revolt to overthrow the German king. And it was a failed revolt. This revolt, of course, was led by Karl Marx and company. So we've got, so this is August Willich. So August Willich then comes to America and becomes a leader, I believe he's a general in the Union Army to fight the Americans. So understand that at the time of the Civil War in America, this is how all this started. You have Abraham Lincoln, and he's part of a network that's backed by these bankers that want to establish a central bank now that Andrew Jackson's gone. And so they start a war with the South, and now they bring in German communists to fight the Americans. So here we have an international war being waged on the American people in the South, the actual Americans. And they're importing people in from Germany who are actual communists, who are actual communist followers of Karl Marx. And this is the Republican Party waging war on America to bring in this new order. So when we look at Karl Marx, let's say Karl Marx, 1848. Karl Marx, 1848 revolutions, says in 1848, amidst a wave of European revolutions, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels actively participated in the revolutionary movements, particularly in Germany and France. They were involved in writing and editing newspapers like the something Zeitung, it's in German, and engaged in political debates surrounding the revolution's goals and strategies. The revolutions, while aiming for liberal and democratic reforms, were ultimately unsuccessful, leading to Marx's exile to London and a period of intense political reflection. Right. So Karl Marx was exiled to London after these failed revolts in Germany. And so Karl Marx was exiled to London. August Willich ended up in the Union Army fighting the Americans on behalf of this international communist network. So it is a communist conspiracy of bankers, and the Republican Party is at the center of it. The Republican Party is at the center of the world communist conspiracy. And Karl Marx and these revolutions. Now, Karl Marx, what else do we have on this? Right. So Karl Marx was what? So Karl Marx, let's look. Karl Marx, Jesuit. Karl Marx attended a Jesuit high school, the Frederick Wilhelm Gymnasium in Trier, Prussia from 1830 to 1835. His father, a lawyer, converted to Lutheranism rather than Catholicism, primarily for professional advancement, so of crypto. While Marx's family was Jewish by ancestry, his father's conversion was a strategic move in response to laws limiting Jews in high society. Now, they call it the Frederick Wilhelm Gymnasium because this was during the time where the Jesuit order had been dissolved, supposedly dissolved, yet was still operating secretly, particularly in the United States, where they had formed a Jesuit base called the District of Columbia. So Karl Marx, but in Europe, it was still very much being operated in secret because the Pope had not fully restored the Jesuit order at this time. What year was Karl Marx there? Okay, it says, oh wait, no, it was 1830 to 1835. So then it would have been restored. Yeah, I don't know. It would have been restored. Yeah, 1830 to 1835. Yeah, so it was a Jesuit school. I brought that up because I thought it was strange. Somebody else in one of these articles, when you say, was Karl Marx a Jesuit, they tried to say he wasn't. And they mentioned because the school had to change its name. But no, that the Jesuit order was restored in 1814 or 15. So yeah, so he was there in 1830. So yeah, it was once again a Jesuit school. So yeah, I should clarify that. Now, okay, so Karl Marx and the Jesuits. Let's look at let me get you some of the names of these people that he was associated with in the Jesuit school. Let's see. Now you think, well, Jesuit, those are the Catholics, and Karl Marx was an atheist, and he called. He says that religion is the opiate of the masses. Yeah, and the only one thing I kind of suspect is that at some point the Catholic Church secularized itself to remain in power. In order to stay in power, it secularized all of its doctrines and basically created a communist cult through the Jesuits. They secularized Christianity through the Jesuits in order to maintain a commercial system. So they just basically took all what they thought were the principles of Christianity and made it into a secular system, so that atheists would support it, and via communism support Rome and the Vatican and the Pope. That appears, in my opinion, to be what has happened, particularly with the establishment of Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, because it came on the heels of, or at the end of, the Enlightenment age, which was a point at which people were abandoning the Catholic Church and wanted something new. And there were different factions in the Enlightenment age. Some of these people were very spiritual and still believed in God, but they just didn't want the Catholic Church involved in their governments. And then there were other factions that were totally atheist, and this was the communist faction. And so there was a point where the Jesuits were kind of, because these were popular movements, the Jesuits had to, or the Catholic Church in general, had to maneuver itself into position where it was going to be the leader of this into the future. And so if you notice that all the ideals of the Enlightenment age have been just destroyed in favor of the hardcore atheist totalitarian communist system, which is just like Catholicism of the Roman brand without Christ. So it's basically exactly like the Roman Catholic the Roman Catholic totalitarian system, the totalitarian mind control system of the Romans without Christ. So it's just they have the same type of mentality, the same type of totalitarian mentality, but without Jesus Christ. So it's just atheist totalitarianism instead of Roman totalitarianism, where you have Christ, their version of Christianity, forced upon everybody. It's the same thing, but now with atheism. So they secularized their stuff. So now let's take a look at the connection between these Jewish organizations and these Jewish bankers and the Catholic Church. Because one thing is, you have to notice that these governments that they were taking out in Europe were all kind of part of this Freemason Enlightenment system. The Jesuits had taken over Freemasonry, and so you'd like to have a record of that, which I can provide. Well, I can kind of provide it for you. I don't have the books with me any longer, but I do have some screenshots of the book. I'll just tell you where you can find the information. The book, the book written by Mackey, which is called A History of Freemasonry by Mackey, is Volume 1, Chapter 31, Jesuits in Freemasonry. So Volume 1, Chapter 31 of Mackey's History of Freemasonry has a chapter called The Jesuits in Freemasonry, Volume 1, Chapter 31. And if you read that chapter, you will see that the Jesuits basically became part of the Masonic system. And that's what Mackey's reporting and recording in his History of Freemasonry. And there's other sources, which I don't have at hand, and I can't give you specifically, but they suggest that, and this is pretty well known, that this group called the Illuminati, which was started by, what's his name? Illuminati founder, what was his name? Adam Weishaupt. So Adam Weishaupt, founder of the Illuminati, involved in the different Masonic orders, right? And I believe he was Jewish, and I believe he was connected to the Jesuits. What does it say in Wikipedia? It might hide. It might now. Wikipedia is caught on to everybody, so it hides a lot. Yeah, it says here, Weishaupt began his formal education at age 7 at a Jesuit school. Okay, so there you go, Jesuit. After Pope Clement's suppression of the Society of Jesus in 1773, Weishaupt became a professor of canon law, and a position that was held exclusively by the Jesuits until that time. In 1775, Weishaupt was introduced to the empirical philosophy of somebody else. Okay. Foundation of the Illuminati. At a time, however, there was no end of making game of and abusing secret societies. I plan to make use of this human foible for real and worthy goal, the benefit of people. Okay, I guess, is this a quote by him? Oh, says Schneider Heinrich, Quest for Mysteries, the Masonic Background for Literature in the 18th Century Germany. Okay, it says, at a time, however, when there was no end of making game of and abusing secret societies, I plan to make use of this human foible for a real and worthy goal, for the benefit of people. I wish to do what the heads of the ecclesiastical and secular authorities ought to have done by virtue of their offices. Okay, so I guess that's a quote by him. So anyway, it suggests that he was a Jesuit. He was involved in these secret societies and the Masonic orders, and this merged with, it says it says here, Weishaupt was initiated in the Masonic Lodge Theodor zum Gutenroth at Munich in 1777. His project of illumination, enlightening the understanding by the sun of reason, which will dispel the clouds of superstition and prejudice. Anyway, long story short, he used Freemasonry to recruit his own quasi-Masonic society with the goal of perfecting human nature through re-education and achieve communal state of nature. Whatever. So, long story short is you have a merger of the Jesuits with the Masonic lodges. Now, what was the outcome of this? Because realize that the Jesuit order was dissolved in the summer of 1773, and the American Revolution, which was a Freemason revolt, started in the winter of 1773. And Georgetown, and then they established Georgetown. So now there's an interesting article. If you look at Wikipedia again, we'll go to Georgetown University. Georgetown University, Wikipedia. It says here, Georgetown University is a private Jesuit research university in Washington, D.C., United States, founded by Bishop John Carroll, who is a Jesuit bishop. And so Georgetown University was founded by Bishop John Carroll, a Jesuit, in 1789. Is the oldest Catholic institution of higher education in the United States, the oldest university in Washington, D.C., and the nation's first federally chartered university. So understand that they established this Jesuit school in 1789 when the papal suppression, during the time that the Jesuit order had been dissolved, they founded a Jesuit school. So it hadn't really been dissolved because Bishop Carroll was appointed by the Pope in coordination with Benjamin Franklin, a Freemason. So let me give you an example. It says in the 19th century, during its early years, is this the part I want? Let's see. Okay, it says here, listen, in 1634, Jesuit settlers from England founded the province of Maryland in colonial-era British America. In 1646, the defeat of the Royalists in the English Civil War led to the stringent laws against Catholic education and the extradition of known Jesuits from the colony, including missionary Andrew White, and the destruction of their school at Calverton Manor. During most of the remainder of Maryland's colonial period, Jesuits conducted Catholic schools clandestinely. Jesuits conducted Catholic schools secretly, clandestinely. Following the end of the American Revolutionary War, plans to establish a permanent Catholic institution for education in the United States were realized. So they were operating secretly and through Freemasonry. And then following the end of the American Civil War, plans to, not American Civil War, pardon me, the American Revolutionary War against the King of England. Because he too had barred the Jesuits and the Catholics. So there were kind of two things happening. The Catholic Church itself got rid of the Jesuit order in 1773 in the summer at the behest of Catholic kings who were being bypassed around the world, all across the world. The Jesuits had set up a commercial system that was bypassing the kings. So the kings weren't getting the money for the businesses being carried out in their, and the reason why is that the Pope had established the Jesuit order initially as a group that would have blind obedience to the Pope, whereas the kings were becoming more autonomous over centuries. Whereas the Jesuit order was to have blind obedience to the Pope and carry out his orders without question. That's what the Jesuit order's mandate was. And they did this, and they were running businesses all over the world, bypassing the kings. So it was the Catholic kings that forced the Pope to dissolve the order in 1773. But if you notice that in the colonies in America, they were also operating clandestinely under the King of England, who was a Protestant king, the Church of England, which is totally separate from the Pope. So now in America in 1773, working with Freemasonry, they started a revolution. They started a revolution to get the king's influence out of that territory and take that territory for themselves through Bishop Carroll, through the Freemason and the Enlightenment movement, which they had hijacked with the Illuminati. So it says here, at Benjamin Franklin's recommendation, Pope Pius VI appointed former Jesuit John Carroll, former Jesuit, not former Jesuit, Jesuit John Carroll, Bishop John Carroll. At Benjamin Franklin's recommendation, Pope Pius VI appointed Jesuit Bishop John Carroll, that's how I'm going to say it, as the first head of the Catholic Church in the United States. Even though the papal suppression of the Jesuit order was still in effect, Carroll began meetings of local clergy in 1783 near Annapolis, which is a city in Maryland, where they orchestrated the development of a new university, Georgetown University. Okay, this is before the establishment of the District of Columbia. Before the District of Columbia, they established this new university in Maryland, which became the District of Columbia. They moved and this is all done by the Pope and his Bishop Carroll, the Jesuits. And then you look at it, because you have a Freemason, Benjamin Franklin, and he's helping to organize all this on behalf of the Pope and the Jesuit Bishop Carroll. And now they're bringing in this new system in America. And the American people think it's for them. They think it's for their race. They think it's for their religion and their people. And it's not. It's not. It was a conspiracy. It was a conspiracy against people like George Washington, most likely, and against people like Thomas Jefferson, who were part of the Enlightenment movement. And they didn't necessarily want to hand everything over to the Pope. But here we go with them, with the Pope, under the guise of freedom of religion, bringing in the Jesuit system to take control of the new colonies through the establishment of a headquarters, a base, a Jesuit base called the District of Columbia. Now, at the same time, you have the rise of the Rothschilds in England and the Warburgs. The Rothschild-Warburg banking cartels are coming to power at the same time. Now, if you read the chapter that I told you, which is called Jesuits and Freemasonry, you will see that part of the program of the Jesuits and Freemasonry was to establish a new aristocracy of themselves, a new aristocracy. And this gets into this entire concept, which is a Jesuit Republican, however you want to put it. It's a Republican program. It's a Jesuit program of regicide. Just look up Jesuits and regicide, and how killing off the kings was the program of the Jesuits and of the Republicans, because they're one and the same. And of course, so if you look at the different people involved in this operation, you have the Jesuits establishing the District of Columbia. You have the Jewish banking cartels that are involved in the commercial operations of the Jesuits in this whole operation. You have Freemasonry being used by the Jesuits and by the Jewish banking cartels. And you have the Republican Party, which is the political group, which becomes the channel of these different forces. The Republican Party becomes the channel of the Jewish banking cartels and the Jesuit system being established in Washington, D.C. Now, we look at what happened. Let's go back and look at, because we see, okay, so in 1773, you've got a revolt against the King of England. And then they establish a Jesuit school, and then more revolts happen, right? Then you have a revolt in France, and they kill the king. So you've got a revolt in America, then you've got a revolt in France, and they kill the king. And this is 100% backed by the new government in America. Thomas Jefferson is 100% backing it. George Washington, on the other hand, says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! There's something wrong with this. Something's not right about this." So let's read this. Let's read what George Washington had to say. George Washington letter, Illuminati. George Washington got a little spooked by this stuff. Let's see if I can get a copy of it that I can read. I don't know that I'm going to read you the whole letter, but it says here, here's somebody quoting it. "It was not my intention to doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati and the principles of Jacobinism had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more truly satisfied of this fact than I am." That's part of that. I wish I could read you the whole thing here now. Well, it's in his handwriting. It might be difficult to read. Let me see if here's a copy from. Let's see. Translated text. Translated. I want to read the. I don't want to read it in the. I don't want to read his handwriting. I'd like to see a copy that's. Yeah. Let's see if this is it. Also, I don't want to mess up my computer. So you have the Jacobin revolt, right? Of course, the Jacobins were meeting in a monastery, a Catholic monastery, to plot the overthrow and murder of the King of France. It says here, to Reverend G.W. Snyder, Mount Vernon, September 25th, 1798. "Sir, my apologies are due to you for not acknowledging the receipt of your obliging favor of the 22nd something, for not thanking you at an earlier period of the book you had the goodness to send me. I have heard much of the nefarious and dangerous plan and the doctrines of the Illuminati, but never saw the book until you were pleased to send it to me. The same causes which have prevented my acknowledging the receipt of your letter have prevented my reading the book hitherto, namely the multiplicity of matters which pressed upon me before and the debilitated state in which I was left after. A severe fever has been removed, and which allowed me to add little more now than thanks for your kind wishes and favorable sentiments, except to correct an error you have run into of my presiding over the English lodges in this country. The fact is, I preside over none, nor have I been in one or more than once or twice within the last 30 years. I believe, notwithstanding, that none of the lodges in this country are contaminated with the principle ascribed to the Society of the Illuminati. With respect, I am," and then I don't know what that other word means, or even is. It's like an ampersand and a C. This is a translation from a handwritten thing, so some of these symbols aren't translating that well for me. I guess he was sent a book from this guy, Reverend G.W. Snyder, about the Illuminati and the takeover of the lodges, and this man's trying to warn George Washington about it. And here's I guess it's to William Russell, Mount Vernon, September 28th, 1798. "Sir, your favor of the 8th instructions received, and I thank you for your obliging attention to the articles promised me when I had the pleasure of seeing you at this place." Okay, that's not the one I wanted. Anyway, sorry about that. George Washington wrote a letter about the Illuminati and the democratic societies. Let's just get that one. Okay. You can look it up. I can't find it right now. And so so he wrote a letter about it. So he saw the danger in what was happening with these quote unquote democratic societies and the Illuminati and the takeover of the lodges and the dangers of this. And of course, this danger was then spread into France, where they where they started killing the aristocracy there, and they killed the King of France. The same King of France who had helped Americans in their revolution was now being rounded up and killed. Of course, France was, I believe, also involved in Masonry, and was also involved in, I believe the King of France also, I believe, was part of the suppression of the Jesuits. I know that I don't know if it was that king, but I know that, well, I think it was that king that they killed was part of the suppression of the Jesuits, and that was also seeking more autonomy from the Pope. So it was one after another in Europe where they started taking out these kings. So now when you look at, there's so the main factors, then you got the Jewish bankers, you've got the Jesuit order, you've got the Illuminati and the Masonic lodges, and you have the Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln, for instance, and Karl Marx, and the 1848 revolt. And if you notice, it became more of a thing of using Jews, particularly in the East, out of Ukraine to attack Russia. They needed a force out there that wanted to get revenge on the Tsar. And the main group that wanted revenge against the Tsar and against Christianity in general was the Jewish people living in Ukraine, who had felt like they were dejected and that they had been abused by the Tsar and by the Russian people. So it was this group that was backed by the Republican Party and by the Jewish banking cartels of the Rothschild Schiff network, Warburg network, that backed Jewish revolutionaries with the American Jewish Friends of Free Russia, and brought in this new government in Russia, which was the communist government, which was totally violent, totally genocidal, and had an absolute hatred for the people who they were ruling over, and started to kill them, started to arrest them and kill them, because this is the revenge of the Jews of Eastern Europe against the populations of Eastern Europe, backed by the U.S. government under communism. And so this is what is left out. So now here's an article from heretical.com called Jews and Bolshevism. Here's some lists, right? The most detailed description of Jewish influence in the Bolshevik Revolution comes from Robert Wilton, the Russian correspondent of the Times in 1920. He publishes a book in French, Les Derniers Jours des Romanovs. Les Derniers Jours des Romanovs, which I don't know what that means because I don't speak French. Which gave the racial background of all the members of the Soviet government. This does not appear in the later English translation for some odd reason. After the publication of this monumental work, Wilton was ostracized by the press and he died in poverty in 1925. He reported that the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party was made up as follows. And he's got a list here. Name, nationality. Bronstein Trotsky, Jew. Applebaum, Zinoviev, Jew. Lorine, Jew. Arutsky, Jew. Volodarsky, Jew. Rosenfeld, Kamernev, because sometimes they'll have two names if they change their names, Jew. Smidovich, Jew. Sverdlov, Yankel, Jew. Nakhamech Slelkov, Jew. Ulyanov Lenin, Russian. Krylenko, Russian. Lunacharsky, Russian. So then the next list here is the Council of the People's Commissars comprise the following. It says ministry, name, and nationality. The President, Ulyanov Lenin, Russian. Foreign Affairs, Chicherin, Russian. Nationalities is the ministry. Zhugashvili, Stalin, Georgian. Agriculture. Proshian is his name. He's an Armenian. Economic Council, Lorine. Jew. Food, Schlichter, Jew. Army and Navy, Bronstein Trotsky, Jew. State control, Lander, Jew. State and lands, Kaufman, Jew. Works, V. Schmidt, Jew. Social relief, E. Lelina Kingnesian, Jewess. Public instruction, Lurnacharsky, Russian. Religions. So this is the Ministry of Religions. Spitzberg, Jew. So into the new communist government, the Ministry of Religions is run by a Jew, Spitzberg. So now you have this huge territory called Russia, which was literally founded by Christians. The Russian language was literally invented by Christian priests. The Russian language, the Russian alphabet, was invented by Christian priests. But now, under the new communist government sponsored by the United States, the Ministry of Religions is run by a guy named Spitzberg, Jew. Interior, Applebaum Zinoviev, Jew. And so on. Finance, Volodarsky, Jew. Elections, Ortusky, Jew. Justice, Steinberg, Jew. Refugees, Feinstein, Jew. And so on. And this goes on and on and on and on and on. And there's just it's like 90% Jewish. The whole government. I would say it's about 90% Jewish. So so that's the Russian government. Now, consider this also. The Roman Catholic Church, would they be against that? No, they would not. Because the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Church split a long time ago. And the Roman Catholic Church has since said that they are the only true church and that every other church is wrong and needs to submit to Rome. So if but who are they going to get? Who are they going to get to go into Eastern Europe and kill a bunch of Christians and overthrow the government and bring in communism? Well, Christians aren't going to do that. European Christians don't want to do that. They don't want to go raid Christian churches in Russia and kill all the priests and burn down the churches and destroy all the icons of Jesus Christ and Mary. And so you're not going to get Christians to do that, but Jews will do that. Jews want to do that. That's what they want to do. And so this definitely is a benefit to the Roman Pope, to the Vatican. That's why there's always been this alliance since at least since the time of the Enlightened Age between the Jews and the Roman Catholic Church, because it was the enemies of the Roman Catholic Church that are all being wiped out by the Jesuits, by the revolutions, and by Jews who were involved in all of these revolutions and secret societies and are involved in operationally and also involved in financing it, because there's a common enemy between the Pope and the Jews, and it's called Christendom. Because you got to understand, the Catholic kings that were under the Pope were seeking greater autonomy. So it wasn't just the Protestant kings that were catching the ire of the Pope. It was the Catholic kings. And they're the ones forcing the Pope's hand to dissolve the Jesuit order. And they're all gone. They all got wiped out. And then you look to the east, and you have this big church called the Russian Orthodox Church. And this whole territory that was founded by a church that doesn't submit to Rome. And they all got wiped out. Their entire system gets wiped out and replaced with communists, with Jewish communists. And now it's the Jews that are leading the government. And it's this Jewish communist government which is going around breaking up the churches, burning them down to the ground, killing the priests, wiping out the people. They're exterminating people. And I don't know that the Pope even bats an eye at it, because why would he, when this is the enemy in the Pope's mind? As far as the Pope is concerned, this church shouldn't exist. And so, here you go. It's like the thing with Zelensky. And everyone says, okay, so you got the Jewish mafia and the Kaganovich clan and Zelensky and Antony Blinken and all these Jewish people that are organizing with the CIA to overthrow Russia again. And of course, they're all meeting with the Pope, and Zelensky meets with the Pope, and the Pope blesses this operation that's taking place over there in Eastern Europe, which brought the entire world to the brink of nuclear holocaust. And the Pope was supporting it. And the Pope is involved in all the things that people say that the Jewish mafia is doing. All of them. He's invested in all of them because he's invested in their businesses with the Rothschilds, with the Warburgs, with the Rockefellers, who aren't Jewish but are married in with, I believe the Rockefellers are married in with the Warburgs and some of these other people. So they're all intermarrying with them, and they're maintaining their banking. So, but getting back to this chapter 31, volume 1, chapter 31 in the history of Freemasonry, it talks about the establishment of a new aristocracy. Why would they need a new aristocracy? Because the old aristocracy that was established by the Christian system through the Roman Catholic system, and also in the East with the Eastern Orthodox Church, the system, particularly in the West, was no longer serving the interest of the Pope. So the Pope needed a new aristocracy to run his operations. And this was going to be done through the Jesuit order and through the Jewish banking cartels. Now, I've heard it said that Karl Marx was a proponent of central banking. Karl Marx, central bank. I've never read Das Kapital. In the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx envisioned a centralized financial system as a key element of a communist economy, arguing that a national bank controlled by the state would centralize credit and facilitate economic planning. He believed that such a bank could be used to control interest rates and ultimately the entire economy, potentially limiting individual freedom and requiring bureaucratic control. Well, isn't that what we have? And isn't that what was established? And so people like Rush Limbaugh and all these other people that spent their entire careers talking about the communists and capitalism. People like Rush Limbaugh that spent their entire careers talking about free market capitalism. And when someone would bring up to Rush Limbaugh that the Federal Reserve Bank was a private bank and it was involved in some conspiracy with the communists, and Sean Hannity would do the same thing. I literally heard Sean Hannity on the radio more than once say, these people are so stupid. They're trying to say that the communists and the capitalists are the same thing. And that just doesn't make any sense. It's just so dumb. No, dummy, you're dumb. Sean Hannity is dumb. Sean Hannity's dumb. And Rush Limbaugh was dumb. And either they're dumb because they're shills or they're dumb because they're just ignorant and they're stupid. But it says right here, the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx envisioned a centralized financial system as a key element of a communist economy, arguing that a national bank controlled by the state would centralize credit and facilitate economic planning. He believed that such a bank could be used to control interest rates and ultimately the entire economy. Now, I haven't read Das Kapital, and I don't know who wrote this in this AI overview on Google. So go look it up. Go look it up. I don't really care to look it up because I assume it's correct. And I don't really care. I've heard communists tell me this. So they read it. They're telling me this. I assume it's correct. I assume that's what Karl Marx said. Why would I don't know. So, but here's the thing. That's why you have a progressive income tax. We have a progressive income tax in America. We're following the Karl Marx plan. It's established by the Republican banking cartel, Jacob Schiff, the people that overthrew the czar, the people that brought in the Federal Reserve. They have a central bank that controls the interest rates through Jerome Powell right now is the Federal Reserve System. And they have a progressive income tax, which is what Karl Marx literally says to do, is to have a progressive income tax where the higher earners pay a larger percentage and the lower earners pay a smaller percentage. That's the progressive income tax. So everything we have in America, as far as our economic system, our governmental system, isn't based on what the founding fathers initially started, but is based on Karl Marx and the Republican Party. And republicanism is Marxism, and Marxism is central banking, and the Republican Party is central banking. And the communist revolutions that you've seen carried out all across Europe and in Russia and around the world is the Republican Party, and is the central banking system, and is the Jesuit order, and to the benefit of the Pope. And all those things are tied together. And if you don't know that, then you're going to not have a clear picture of where the bullets are being fired from. And that's really the only reason I'm telling you, so that you know, and it's quite obvious if you just read the articles that I recommended, that you know where the shots are being fired from. Let's see. So what else is there? I guess that's it. So anyway, no, it's not really it, because then you had the overthrow of Assad in Syria, or they attempted the overthrow of these different. When you look at what they're doing with ISIS and Al Qaeda and so forth, right? Well, that's just like what they did in Europe. And in Europe, see, they'll use whatever group is, has the beef with the ruler. In the Middle East, it's Muslim radicals. In Eastern Europe, it was Jewish communists. They're the ones that you could use to overthrow the king. In the Middle East, you can use Muslim radicals to overthrow the king. And they all have the same kind of we're the poor people, or we're the outcasts of society, and they're stealing from us, and we have to get revenge, and we need to bring in a new order. This is the same program they've been using since the French Revolution with the Jacobin, and the 1848 revolt, and the revolt in Russia. And it all started in 1773 with the Boston Tea Party. That doesn't mean that everything America did was wrong. In fact, how America started was pretty great, because it started with these Enlightenment ideals. But those are the people that this group could use at the time. But if you notice, those ideals of Enlightenment were abandoned for communism, for totalitarianism, because that was always the end goal. It's like they always, they'll back some group, whether it's this group or that group, to get rid of the existing power. And then they're always going to bring in the same type of totalitarian thing, which, particularly in the case of America following the Civil War, has been the most oppressive form of government. Which I'm just going to end off on. This reminds me of the story of Ruth in the Bible. I think it was Ruth. I saw this movie one time. It was really good. It was about the story of this girl named Ruth, and she was a Philistine, and she was chosen by the high priest of the cult of Dagon, I believe it was. The Philistines worshiped this god, and they would sacrifice virgins to their god. And so the way that they would pick a virgin to sacrifice is that the virgin was to have no blemish. She was to be perfect, the perfect child, no blemish, nothing wrong, no infirmity, right? And so they would kill her, right? They would kill the perfect person, the person with no infirmity, no blemish. There's nothing wrong with them. They're perfect. And that's who they would choose to kill for their God, right? Well, isn't that just like communism? They always seek to kill the best. The best people in the society are the ones that they kill. in favor of the infirmed and the vulnerable and the this and the that. We're constantly being lectured by, not so much anymore now that we have Donald Trump, but we've constantly been lectured for decades by the U.S. government about how these poor people here and these poor people there, and we all just have to sacrifice because you're just hurting all these poor people. It's always the guy that's got the problem, that he's the one that the government's oriented around under this system. It's very oppressive. I believe that originates from some kind of perverted, secularized Roman Catholic ideology. And it's the strong and the smart, the intelligent people, the intelligent people, and the good people, the good-looking people. Those are the ones you have to kill off in favor of the goblins and the weirdos and the freaks and the perverts and the degenerates and the criminals. That seems to me to have been the ideology of the West as long as I've been alive. It's starting to change now with Donald Trump, and it cannot change fast enough. And I hope it changes completely and forever. But why am I bringing this up kind of right now? Because we've got this guy over, Senator What's-His-Face, and the other people that are involved in trying to maintain the system here with the criminality, with the gang members, right? With the foreign terrorists that are coming here, and that they should have rights, and they have all, and so the American people are once again the problem. And the guy that's the illegal immigrant, and he's part of an international terror gang, right? These are the people who they care about. These are the people that they love. These are the people they support. These are the people they defend. Which reminds me of the story of Ruth, because they chose this perfect girl, so literally like the perfect child with no blemish and no infirmity, right? She's not going to reproduce, and she's not going to have a family, and she's not going to be part of the society. They're going to kill her in favor of something worse. And that's been America and Europe since for I would say since the establishment of this new order that came after the Civil War. So anyway, I think with that I'll end off. And so a lot of the stuff I've been talking about, I just want to get into one video so it's not strewn throughout all my videos on the internet. So you kind of go there and see the articles I'm talking about. And there's many more. I'm not going to recite all of them or try and read them all, but those are some of the key ones. So have a good afternoon.